Her best friend agreed to play the fiancé. The deposit in his account said someone else was writing the script. Hey, before we step into this, come here for a second. I don't know where you are right now. Maybe it's late. Maybe you're between things, between obligations, between moods, between the version of your day you planned and the version that actually showed up. Wherever you're sitting, lying, scrolling, I'm glad you found this. Tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city. Drop your country. I want to know who's in this room tonight. Now! Carry this into the story with you. It's going to matter before it's over. The safest lie will always cost more than the hardest truth. You just don't get the bill until later. Let's go. The engagement ring cost $42. Marigold Vance knew because she'd been standing next to Beckett Nolan at the jewelry counter in a pawn shop on Atlantic Avenue when he bought it. Cubic zirconia, silver band. Yeah, the kind of ring that looked real in photographs and turned your finger green by the third day. It needs to be convincing, Beckett said, holding it up to the fluorescent light. It needs to survive a week, maybe two. And then we break up, publicly, amicably, and I disappear before anyone looks too close. Beckett studied her, the way he'd been studying her since 7th grade, not romantically, not clinically, but with the particular attention of a man who'd memorized another person's patterns and could read her silences like subtitles. You're 14 weeks pregnant, Mari. Disappearing isn't a 2-week project. It is if I do it right. Wednesday evening, October, Brooklyn. The boxing gym on Van Brunt Street didn't have a sign. It had a red door and a reputation. Beckett trained there 4 nights a week. Middleweight, amateur, good enough to win local cards but too smart to go pro. Then he managed the gym's office on weekends. Books, scheduling, vendor accounts. The back room smelled like leather polish and Tiger Balm. They sat in that back room now, Marigold in the cracked vinyl chair behind the desk, Beckett on the edge of the desk itself, legs swinging, ring box open between them. Her hand was in her jacket pocket, thumb moving across the brass St. Christopher medal she'd carried since she was 16, her grandmother's worn smooth as a river stone. Patron saint of travelers, of people in transit, of women running from one life and not yet arrived at the next. Who are we performing for exactly? Beckett asked. Everyone. My landlord, my co-workers, anyone who might mention my name to anyone connected to... She stopped. Say it. Maurizio. The name dropped into the room like a change in barometric pressure. Beckett's jaw shifted. Not fear. Recalibration. Yet the name Maurizio Calabrese carried a specific gravity in Red Hook and most of Brooklyn that required adjustment even from men who'd never met him. Marigold hadn't seen Maurizio in 11 weeks. 11 weeks since he'd called her to the terrace of his Cobble Hill apartment, handed her an envelope containing $8,000 in cash, and told her, with the flat operational tone of a man closing a file, that their relationship was over. No argument, no negotiation. No explanation beyond 5 words said this is how it has to be. She'd left the envelope on his kitchen counter, walked out, threw up in the alley behind his building. I'd sigh, though at the time she'd attributed that to shock rather than the embryo already forming inside her. She found out about the pregnancy 9 days later, alone, bathroom floor of her Gowanus apartment, 2 tests, both positive, and the immediate, uncrystallizing understanding that the father of this child was a man who controlled shipping routes, construction contracts, and half the commercial real estate in South Brooklyn, a man who had just removed her from his life with the efficiency of an accountant closing a quarter. She didn't tell him. She called Beckett instead. So the plan, Beckett said, ticking points on his fingers, is that we're engaged, quickly. Whirlwind romance between old friends. You're pregnant, with my baby. As far as anyone asks, we sell it for a few weeks until you can relocate. Philadelphia, I have a cousin there. And Maurizio never finds out the baby is his. Correct. And you're certain that's what you want. Marigold's thumb pressed harder against the brass metal. St. Christopher. Protector of travelers, she was traveling now, away from a man she'd loved, toward a life she hadn't planned, carrying a secret that could detonate both. What I want doesn't factor into this. What matters is what's safe. For the baby. For everyone. Beckett was quiet for 6 seconds. She counted. His silences had a rhythm. Short ones meant agreement. Medium ones meant processing. Long ones meant he was about to say something she didn't want to hear. 6 seconds was medium. I'll do it, he said. But I need you to know, this isn't a costume I can take on and off, Mari. People are going to believe it. My mother, the guys at the gym. Oh, and if Maurizio's people come asking questions, I need to be able to sell it without blinking. Can you? I've been your best friend for 19 years. I can sell anything that keeps you safe. He slid the ring across the desk. Marigold picked it up. $42. Cubic zirconia. The weight of nothing pretending to be something. She put it on. It fit perfectly, but which felt like the kind of detail that should have been comforting, but instead made her stomach turn. Because the things that fit too easily were usually the things that cost the most to remove. Friday, she said. We do the announcement Friday. Dinner at Osteria on Court Street. Somewhere visible. Somewhere word travels. And if word travels to Maurizio? Then he sees a pregnant woman engaged to someone else and moves on. He already moved on. 11 weeks ago. Beckett looked at the ring on her finger. Something crossed his face. Fast, unguarded, gone before she could name it. But present. Registered. Friday, he confirmed. Marigold drove home, October dark. Brooklyn streetlights casting orange intervals across her windshield. She parked on her block, sat in the car for 3 minutes, hand on her belly, hand on the metal. 14 weeks. The baby was the size of a lemon. So she'd read that in an app she checked compulsively. Every week, a new fruit comparison, as if the only way to understand a growing human was to translate it into produce. She reached for her phone to check the app again. Stopped. A notification. Not the app. Her banking alert. She opened it. Beckett's joint gym account, the one she had view access to because she'd helped him set up the books 18 months ago, showed a new deposit. $75,000. Deposited today. Wire transfer. An originating account. Calabrese Holdings, LLC. $75,000 from Maurizio's company into Beckett's account. Deposited the same day Beckett agreed to be her fake fiancé. Marigold stared at the screen. The orange streetlight pulsed against the windshield. The car was silent. The metal was warm from her grip. 2 possibilities. 1. Beckett had been in contact with Maurizio, had told him about the pregnancy, had agreed to play the fiancé not to protect Marigold. Yeah, but to monitor her. 19 years of friendship, purchased for $75,000. 2. Something she hadn't considered yet. A door she couldn't see? Both possibilities ended with the same question. If Maurizio was already writing the script, what role had he assigned her? Marigold Vance met Maurizio Calabrese because of a radiator. Her apartment in Gowanus, 3rd floor, pre-war building, plus windows that rattled when trucks passed, had a heating system that operated on spite. February in Brooklyn meant layering sweaters and boiling water on the stove for warmth. When the radiator finally died on a Thursday night, her landlord sent a repair crew the next morning. The crew was 2 men. One carried tools, the other carried authority. Maurizio didn't introduce himself as the owner of the building, and he introduced himself as the guy making sure they don't break anything worse. He wore a navy coat, work boots that had actually seen work, hands that belonged to someone who'd built things before he'd started buying them. He was 34, dark hair cut short, a face that looked like it had been designed for seriousness and occasionally surprised itself with warmth. When he smiled, which he did exactly once during that first visit, when Marigold's cat knocked a wrench off the radiator, the entire geometry of his expression rearranged. Your cat has opinions about plumbing, he said. She has opinions about everything. She gets it from me. He looked at her. The way certain people look at you when you've said something that confirms a suspicion they didn't know they were carrying. Not scanning, not appraising, recognizing. I'll have the whole system replaced by Monday, he said. The landlord said he'd patch it. The landlord works for me. I'm saying replaced. He left. The radiator was replaced by Saturday, 2 days ahead of schedule. The entire building's heating system was overhauled by the following Friday. 6 apartments, full retrofit. Because a woman on the 3rd floor had a cold apartment and a cat with opinions. Marigold didn't realize until weeks later that Maurizio Calabrese owned 14 buildings in South Brooklyn, and hadn't personally visited a repair call in over 3 years. He'd come to hers. They fell into each other the way certain people do, not gradually, not cautiously, but with the specific momentum of two lives that had been running parallel and finally intersected. The first date, Moisin, a walk across the Brooklyn Bridge at 11 p.m. because Maurizio said he thought better over water and Marigold said she thought better in motion. They walked for 2 hours, talked about nothing that mattered and everything that did. He told her about his father, Aldo Calabrese, dead 6 years, a man who'd built the family's construction empire with his hands and governed it with rules Maurizio was still learning to carry. She told him about her grandmother, the brass medal, at the St. Christopher, the woman who'd raised her after her mother left. Left where? Maurizio asked. Just left. No forwarding address, no phone call. I was 9. And your father? Never met him. My grandmother used to say I was raised by a saint and a medal. She was the saint. This is the medal. She pulled it from her pocket. Brass, worn smooth. He held it in his palm for a moment, carefully, the way you hold something that belongs to someone else's survival. Oh, she sounds like she was enough, he said. She was everything. He handed the medal back. Their fingers touched during the transfer. Neither of them pretended it was accidental. 3 months. That's how long the relationship lived in the open. 3 months of dinners in restaurants where the staff knew his name and the bill never arrived. 3 months of drives along the waterfront in a car that cost more than Marigold's annual salary. And 3 months of a man who listened to her the way engineers listen to structures, assessing load-bearing walls, identifying which parts held everything up. She met his world in increments. The social club on Columbia Street where men played cards and spoke in a dialect she couldn't follow. His cousin Prospero, who ran the family's shipping logistics and laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. His consigliere, an older man named Benedetto Ferrara, who shook Marigold's hand at a Sunday dinner and said, "You're the radiator girl," with an expression that suggested he'd already run a background check. She probably had been background checked. She chose not to ask. Here's something nobody tells you about loving someone powerful. The power isn't the problem. The problem is the silence that power requires. The phone calls taken in other rooms. The schedules that shift without explanation. The men who appear and disappear from your periphery like weather patterns you're not authorized to read. You don't fall in love with a dangerous man because of the danger. You fall in love because, in the private hours, in the space between the locked doors and the unexplained absences, he's the most present person you've ever known. And that presence becomes addictive. That's because a man who controls everything and still chooses to be still with you is offering something rare. Attention without agenda, until the agenda arrives. It arrived on a Tuesday, late May. Maurizio called her to his apartment. Cobble Hill, the terrace overlooking the harbor. She'd been there dozens of times, feet on the railing, wine in hand, watching container ships move through the narrows like slow-motion chess pieces. This time he didn't offer wine, didn't sit, but stood at the railing with his back to the water and handed her a manila envelope. What is this? $8,000. For what? For you, moving expenses. First and last month, somewhere new. A fresh start. The words arrived in an order Marigold's brain refused to process. She held the envelope like it was written in a language she'd suddenly forgotten. A fresh start from what? From me. 5 words. Flat. Operational. It had the tone of a man closing a file he'd already read the last page of. This is how it has to be, he said. That's not an explanation, that's a sentence. Ja, Hans. It's both. Maurizio, 3 days ago you made me dinner. You stood in your kitchen and made pasta from scratch and told me about your father teaching you to fold dough when you were 8. And now you're handing me an envelope and calling it a fresh start? His jaw tightened. The only movement, the rest of him, statue still. A man who'd locked every door inside himself and was watching her knock on each one from the outside. I need you to leave, Marigold. And I need you to not contact me. Why? Because I can't protect you from what's coming if you're standing next to me. The first honest thing he'd said since she walked in. But it was wrapped in so much silence that the honesty couldn't breathe. What's coming? He didn't answer. Turned back to the water. The container ships, the narrows. The distance he was inserting between them with surgical precision. Marigold left the envelope on the counter. Walked out. Made it to the alley behind his building before her body betrayed her, knees giving, stomach turning, the physical revolt of a woman whose life had just been rearranged without her consultation. She thought it was heartbreak. 9 days later, a pregnancy test told her it was also something else. Now, Beckett, and Beckett Nolan had been Marigold's constant since the 7th grade. Not a boyfriend, not a brother. Something the English language didn't have a clean word for. The person who existed in the space between family and choice, who showed up for every crisis with exactly the right combination of humor and seriousness. Who knew that Marigold drank her coffee with 2 sugars when she was fine and black when she was falling apart? He'd been pouring her black coffee for 11 weeks. At the Beckett worked construction during the day. Ironworker, union, the kind of physical labor that built a body designed for utility rather than display. Nights and weekends at the boxing gym. He lived alone above a hardware store on Sackett Street. Owned almost nothing. Wanted almost nothing. Except the one thing he'd never said aloud. He'd been in love with Marigold since they were 22. A decade of proximity to a woman who trusted him completely and categorized him permanently. Best friend, safe harbor? The person you called at 3 a.m. because you knew he'd answer and never ask for more than you offered. Beckett had never asked for more. Not because he didn't want it, because wanting it openly would have cost him the only role she'd given him, and that role, however insufficient, kept him close. And then Maurizio happened. And then Maurizio ended. And then Marigold called from her bathroom floor with 2 positive tests and a voice that sounded like someone had removed the floor beneath her. And Beckett answered. The way he always answered. I'm coming, don't move. The ring was his idea. The fake engagement, the performance. Not because he wanted to deceive anyone, because Marigold was terrified. And when the woman you've loved silently for a decade is terrified and pregnant and alone, you build whatever shelter she asks for, even if the shelter is a lie, even if the lie requires you to perform a role you've wanted to live for real. $42, cubic zirconia, a prop for a play that Beckett knew, with the quiet, devastating certainty of a man who understood his own position, would end the moment it was no longer needed. And now, $75,000 from Calabrese Holdings sitting in his gym account, money he hadn't requested, from a man he'd never contacted, arriving on the exact day he'd agreed to protect the woman Maurizio had discarded. Beckett stared at his phone, the deposit notification glowing in the dark of his apartment above the hardware store. He didn't call Marigold, not yet. He called the gym's accountant instead. Trace this wire. I need to know who sent it and why. Because Beckett Nolan had spent 19 years protecting Marigold Vance. And he wasn't about to let someone else write the terms. Anna, the restaurant was chosen for its acoustics. Not the food, though the food was good. The acoustics. Osteria sat at the intersection of 3 social currents in Carroll Gardens, old Italian families who'd been eating there since 1987, New Brooklyn money that discovered it through food blogs, and the quiet network of associates who used the back dining room for conversations that never happened. Word spoken at Osteria didn't travel. It arrived within hours. Now to exactly the people you'd expect. Marigold and Beckett walked in at 7:48, her arm through his, the ring visible. 14 weeks pregnant, but not showing. Not in the black dress she'd chosen. Not under the jacket she kept on despite the warmth inside. The hostess seated them at a center table, visible from 3 angles. Beckett had requested it when he made the reservation, playing the role of a man who wanted the world to see his fiancée, when in reality, he was staging a broadcast. I knew what they ordered. Pasta, sparkling water for her, beer for him. How long do we need to be here? Marigold asked. Smile on, voice low. Long enough for Renzo Tagliaferra to see us. He's at the bar. Marigold didn't turn. Which one is he? Gray jacket, 3rd stool from the left. He reports to Prospero Calabrese, who reports to Maurizio. If Renzo sees that ring, Maurizio knows by midnight. And then? And then you're engaged to me, pregnant by me. Moved on from a man who handed you $8,000 and a goodbye. The story writes itself. It should have felt like control, like finally directing the narrative instead of being managed by it. But the ring pressed against Marigold's finger with the specific discomfort of something that fit the hand but not the truth. She reached into her jacket pocket, found the medal, brass, smooth, St. Christopher. Her thumb traced the outlines, the saint carrying the child across the river. Protector of travelers. She was traveling, had been since the bathroom floor, since the terrace, since the moment a man she loved decided her safety required her absence and didn't ask whether she agreed. Beckett reached across the table, took her hand, the one with the ring, held it in a way that was visible from 3 angles, including the third stool at the bar. Relax, he said. We're celebrating. We're performing. Same thing in this neighborhood. Renzo Taliaferro looked. Marigold felt it, the specific weight of a gaze that wasn't casual. He glanced at the ring, at Beckett, at the way Beckett held her hand. Then he reached for his phone. 3 taps, a text sent. The broadcast was live. Marigold exhaled. Phase 1 complete. Now they ate, smiled, played the couple who'd found each other after years of friendship and couldn't wait to start a family. The most dangerous dinner theater in Brooklyn. 20 minutes passed. Pasta arrived. Joe Beckett told a story about a fighter at the gym who'd proposed to his girlfriend during a sparring session and gotten punched by his own cornerman. Marigold laughed, real laughter, the kind Beckett had always been able to extract from her like a specific frequency only he knew how to hit. For 20 minutes, the performance didn't feel like a performance, and that was the part that scared her. 8:31 p.m. The restaurant door opened. Not Maurizio. Something worse. Benedetto Ferrara saw Maurizio's consigliere, the older man who'd shaken Marigold's hand at a Sunday dinner 8 months ago and called her the radiator girl. 70 years old, silver hair combed back, overcoat despite the October warmth. He walked the way old guard men walked, slowly, deliberately, each step a declaration that the room would wait for him. He didn't approach their table, didn't acknowledge them. Walked to the back dining room, disappeared behind the partition. But he'd seen them. Marigold was certain. Benedetto Ferrara didn't enter rooms without cataloging every face inside. We should go, Marigold said. We haven't finished eating. Beckett? Benedetto is here, not Renzo, Benedetto. Maurizio's right hand, that's not a coincidence. It's Osteria on a Friday night. Half of Carroll Gardens is here. Half of Carroll Gardens doesn't report directly to the man I'm hiding a pregnancy from. Beckett set his fork down, read her face. 6 seconds of silence. The long kind. The kind that meant he was about to say something she didn't want to hear. If we leave now, we look like we're running. The whole point of tonight is that we have nothing to hide. Engaged couple. Dinner out. Ordinary. He was right. She hated that he was right. They stayed. Ordered dessert. Beckett's hand found hers again across the table. This time the grip was different. Not staged, not angled for visibility. Tight, protective. Dimmed the hold of a man who'd registered the threat and was anchoring himself to the person he intended to shield from it. 9:14 p.m., Marigold excused herself to the restroom. Down the narrow hallway past the kitchen, ladies' room on the left. She pushed the door open. Stopped. Benedetto Ferrara was standing in the hallway, not near the men's room, not near the kitchen, in the hallway itself. Positioned. Waiting. Marigold. His voice carried the texture of old wood and old money. Warm on the surface, load-bearing underneath. Benedetto, you look well. Congratulations are in order, I understand. He glanced at the ring. His expression didn't change. The assessment was already complete. Thank you. The young man, he's a friend of yours from the neighborhood? My fiancé, Beckett Nolan. Nolan. He repeated the name the way a man files a document. Precisely, permanently. And the engagement, it was recent? Very. How wonderful, new love. A fresh start. The phrase, a fresh start, landed with the exact weight of the words Maurizio had used on the terrace. The same phrase, the same construction. Said by the man who stood closest to Maurizio in every room. Coincidence was not a concept that existed in Benedetto Ferrara's vocabulary. I'll pass along my congratulations to the family, Benedetto said. Smiling, the kind of smile that carried information in both directions, telling you something while learning something from your reaction. That's not necessary. Nonsense. Happy news should be shared. Maurizio will be pleased to hear you've moved on. Maurizio will be pleased. The sentence was a test. Marigold felt it, the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm registers on the forecast. Benedetto wasn't delivering good wishes. He was measuring her response, watching for the flinch. That's the overcorrection, the micro expression that would confirm whatever suspicion had brought him to this hallway. She gave him nothing. 19 years of friendship with Beckett Nolan had taught her one critical skill: how to keep her face still when everything inside was moving. Tell Maurizio I appreciate the thought, she said. Smiled, walked into the restroom, closed the door, leaned against it, hand on the metal, hand on her belly, both anchors working at full capacity. Understand something right now. Before we go deeper, when someone powerful sends their closest advisor to intercept you in a restaurant hallway, that's not chance, that's choreography. Benedetto didn't come to Osteria for the pasta. He came because Renzo's text arrived because the information was processed, and because someone, Maurizio or Benedetto himself, decided that the engagement announcement required immediate verification. They're not circling Marigold because they're curious. They're circling because the story doesn't add up. A woman Maurizio discarded 11 weeks ago is suddenly engaged to a man who wasn't in the picture 14 days ago. Pregnant, glowing, wearing a ring at a center table in the one restaurant where word travels fastest. It's too clean, too fast, too performed. And men like Benedetto Ferrara have spent their entire careers identifying performances. Marigold returned to the table. Beckett read her face instantly. What happened? Benedetto. In the hallway. He knows about the engagement. He's going to tell Maurizio tonight. That was the plan. The plan was Renzo. A second-hand report. Filtered, distant. Benedetto is first-hand. He looked me in the eye and used the same phrase Maurizio used when he ended things, a fresh start. That's not gossip, Beckett. That's a message. Beckett's hand moved to his water glass, held it without drinking, processing. What kind of message? The kind that says they're already paying attention. The kind that means Renzo's text wasn't the first piece of information they received about us. What do you mean? I mean, what if they already knew? Before tonight? Before the ring? What if this dinner wasn't a broadcast? What if it was a confirmation of something they were already watching? Beckett went still, the specific stillness of a man whose internal math just changed. The deposit, he said, $75,000 from Calabrese Holdings. Now, the same day you agreed to do this. Marigold leaned forward. You told me you didn't know where it came from. I don't. I called the accountant Wednesday. He's tracing the wire. Beckett, if Maurizio put money in your account before we even staged this engagement, then he knew about the plan before we made it. Which means someone told him. Which means someone close to you is already talking to him. The restaurant hummed. Plates clinked. Renzo Taliaferro finished his drink at the bar. Benedetto's overcoat was visible through the partition, still in the back room, still present, still cataloging. And Marigold Vance, 14 weeks pregnant, fake ring burning green under the table, brass metal pressed between her fingers, realized that the lie she'd built to protect her baby might have been visible from the beginning. Not because the performance failed, because the audience was already in the theater before the curtain went up. Saturday, 11:07 a.m., the boxing gym. Beckett's accountant was named Odessa Price. 53 years old, former forensic auditor for the state comptroller's office. Left government work after 15 years because, as she put it, I got tired of finding crimes nobody wanted to prosecute. Now she freelanced. Small businesses, nonprofits, the occasional gym run by a middleweight boxer who kept his books cleaner than most hedge funds. She arrived at the gym Saturday morning carrying a laptop and a single sheet of paper. Sat in the back office, placed the paper on the desk between Beckett and Marigold, the way a surgeon places an X-ray on the light board. Here's what's inside you. The wire originated from Calabrese Holdings, LLC, Odessa said. Shell entity, registered in Delaware. Oh, that standard opacity structure, yeah. You'd need a federal subpoena to see the beneficial owner. But we don't need one because the routing number traces through First Atlantic Bank and Red Hook. And First Atlantic has exactly one commercial client of this size. Maurizio, Marigold said. His organization. Whether he personally authorized the transfer is a different question. The account has 3 signatories: Maurizio Calabrese, Prospero Calabrese, and Benedetto Ferrara, 3 signatories. 3 possible sources. The money could have come from Maurizio himself, a man paying to monitor his discarded lover. From Prospero, Maurizio's cousin, the logistics man who laughed too loudly. Or from Benedetto, the consigliere who'd intercepted Marigold in a restaurant hallway 12 hours ago with a smile that carried intelligence in both directions. There's something else, Odessa said. She opened the laptop, turned it toward them, a spreadsheet, 12 entries. Monthly transfers been signed $5,000 each from the same Calabrese Holdings account to a company called Meridian Security Solutions. What's Meridian? Beckett asked. Private security firm, licensed in New York and New Jersey. They provide executive protection, residential monitoring, and, Odessa paused, choosing the word carefully, surveillance services. Surveillance, Marigold repeated. The transfer started in June, 5 months ago, not 2 weeks after your relationship with Maurizio ended. Marigold's hand found the medal in her pocket. Brass, smooth, St. Christopher carrying the child across the river. But this time, the river felt deeper, the current faster. He's been paying a security company since June, Marigold said. To watch what? To watch whom? Odessa corrected. Agnes Meridian's client intake form, which I obtained through a contact who owes me a very large favor, lists the surveillance subject as a residential address in Gowanus. Marigold's address. 5 months. Maurizio had been paying a private security firm to monitor her apartment for 5 months. Since 2 weeks after the terrace. Since 2 weeks after he'd handed her an envelope and said, this is how it has to be. That he'd erased her from his life and then hired someone to watch the space she occupied without him. That's stalking, Beckett said. Flat. The word landing without emotion because the emotion underneath was too large to release in an office that smelled like leather polish and tiger balm. In legal terms, possibly, Odessa said. In practical terms, it depends on intent. Stalking is surveillance for the purpose of harassment or control. Protection is surveillance for the purpose of safety. The distinction is motive. And we don't know the motive, Marigold said. Not yet. Beckett stood, paced. 3 steps to the wall, 3 steps back. The dimensions of the office containing him the way a ring contains a fighter between rounds. The 75,000, he said. Is it connected to Meridian? Different disbursement. Meridian is a monthly retainer. The 75 was a one-time wire. You flagged in the system as operational support / residential. Operational support, Marigold said. That's a line item. Someone categorized it. Someone inside the organization processed the payment and gave it a label. Correct. Which means it wasn't secret. Wasn't hidden. Whoever sent it wanted a paper trail. Odessa nodded. The nod of a woman who'd spent 15 years reading financial documents and recognized the specific difference between money that hides and money that speaks. Whoever sent this money wanted it found, Odessa said. The question is whether they wanted you to find it, or someone else. Hold this for a moment, because it matters more than you think. When someone watches you without telling you, the violation isn't the watching, it's the decision. The unilateral choice to observe your life from a distance rather than participate in it up close. To monitor rather than communicate. I'd art to protect, if that's what this is, through control and instead of conversation. Protecting someone without telling them why isn't love. It's control, wearing a costume. Maurizio may have had reasons, good ones, dangerous ones. But the method, 5 months of silent surveillance, a security firm paid from a shell account, a $75,000 deposit into the account of the man closest to Marigold, the method tells you something about how this man processes love. He builds systems. He doesn't build bridges. And Marigold, who was never consulted, never informed, never given the dignity of deciding her own safety, is standing inside a system she can't see the edges of. Marigold drove home. Saturday afternoon. Brooklyn traffic thick and indifferent. She parked on her block, sat in the car, looked at her building. 3rd floor, Pre-war, the windows where the radiator had died and a man had arrived to fix it personally. I.e., the building Maurizio owned, a fact she'd known since the beginning but hadn't fully processed until this moment. He owned her building. He'd been paying a security firm to monitor it. He'd placed $75,000 in her best friend's account. And none of this information had been given to her. All of it had been arranged around her, silently, precisely, the way you arrange furniture in a room while someone is sleeping. She got out of the car, walked toward the entrance. Jing stopped. The lobby door, usually locked, usually requiring her key, was propped open. A rubber wedge jammed under the base, maintenance style. But there was no maintenance scheduled. She'd checked the building's notice board yesterday. Inside the lobby, a man she didn't recognize, mid-30s, plain jacket, standing near the mailboxes with his phone out, not checking mail, not waiting for anyone. Positioned. He looked up when she entered, neutral expression, not the trained blankness of someone whose job was to see without being seen. "Afternoon," he said. "Do you live here?" Marigold asked. "Visiting a friend? Third floor?" Third floor? Her floor. 3 apartments on it. Hers, an elderly woman named Phoebe who'd lived there for 30 years, and a unit that had been vacant since July. "Which apartment?" Marigold asked. The man smiled, put his phone away, walked past her toward the door. "Have a good day," he said. Gone. Us Marigold stood in the lobby, heart rate elevated, hand in pocket, metal between her fingers. She climbed to the 3rd floor, checked her door, locked, checked Phoebe's door, quiet, television faintly audible inside, checked the vacant unit at the end of the hall. The door was closed. But the lock, she noticed it the way a woman who'd spent 5 months being unknowingly surveilled notices things differently now. The lock had fresh scratches around the keyhole. Recent use, regular access. As she pressed her ear to the door, quiet humming electronic, the sound of equipment running, not an appliance, not heating, something sustained, something powered. Meridian Security Solutions, $5,000 a month. Residential monitoring? They weren't watching her building from the outside. They were operating from the vacant apartment on her floor. Marigold stepped back, breathing controlled. 14 weeks pregnant. Standing in a hallway where the air tasted different now, not stale, not dangerous, but watched. The specific atmospheric change of a space that has been observed so thoroughly that the observation itself becomes a texture. She didn't knock on the door, didn't try the handle, didn't call the police. She called Beckett. "The vacant apartment on my floor, it's not vacant. There's equipment inside. Meridian isn't monitoring my building from a distance, but they have a unit, 10 feet from my front door." Silence on the line. 3 seconds. Short agreement. "Yeah, pack a bag," Beckett said. "You're staying at my place until we figure out who authorized this and why." "Beckett, pack a bag, Mari. Whatever you need for the weekend. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She hung up, entered her apartment, started packing. And as she pulled clothes from the closet and toiletries from the bathroom, she caught herself doing something she hadn't done in 11 weeks. Now wondering whether Maurizio Calabrese had ended their relationship to hurt her bonds or to build something around her that she was never supposed to see. Both possibilities terrified her. But one of them, the one where he'd been watching from 10 feet away for 5 months without a word, terrified her in a way that felt less like threat and more like grief. Because surveillance that thorough wasn't obsession. It was devotion that had forgotten how to speak. Sunday, 6:12 a.m. Also Beckett's apartment. Marigold didn't sleep. She lay on Beckett's couch, the one that smelled like gym bags and cedar soap, staring at the ceiling of an apartment above a hardware store on Sackett Street, while the brass metal pressed its shape into her palm. Saint Christopher, the child on his shoulders, the river beneath. She'd been the child once, carried by her grandmother across every current childhood could throw, absent mother, non-existent father, at a succession of apartments that got smaller as the money got thinner. The metal was the only inheritance that mattered. Not because it was valuable, because it was held, every day, through every crossing. Now Marigold was the one carrying. 14 weeks of a life she hadn't planned, fathered by a man who'd built a surveillance operation inside her hallway rather than pick up the phone. Beckett slept in his bedroom with the door open. She could hear his breathing, waxy, steady, deep. At the rhythm of a man who processed anxiety through physical exhaustion and had apparently done 200 push-ups before bed. At 6:12 a.m., her phone buzzed. Not Beckett. Not the banking app. A text from a blocked number. Apartment 3C, 8 a.m. Come alone, the door will be unlocked. 3C, the vacant unit. The one with the fresh scratches on the lock and the electronic hum behind the door. Someone inside the surveillance operation was inviting her in. Marigold sat up. I read the message 3 times. Calculated. Option 1, ignore it. Stay on Beckett's couch. Let the lawyers handle it. Let Odessa trace more wires. Play defense. Option 2, go. Walk into the room that had been watching her for 5 months and find out what was on the other side of the glass. Option 3, tell Beckett. Let him come with her. Safety in numbers. But the text said come alone. And Marigold understood. From 3 months inside Maurizio's world, from Sunday dinners and social club silences and the specific body language of men who communicated through structure, also, that come alone wasn't a threat. It was a condition. Whoever sent this message had information they would share with her, and only her. A second person in the room would close the window. She left a note on Beckett's kitchen counter. Went for a walk. Back by 9. Don't worry, he would worry. He always worried. But he'd also respect the note, because 19 years of friendship had taught him that Marigold Vance didn't leave instructions she didn't mean. 53 a.m. Gowanus. October morning. The sky the color of cement. Marigold walked her block with her hands in her jacket pockets, metal in the left, phone numbers in the right. The building looked the same as it always did. Pre-war brick. Fire escapes like iron rib cages. The coffee shop on the corner not yet open. She entered the lobby, climbed to the 3rd floor, stood in front of 3C. The door was unlocked, as promised. She pushed it open. The apartment was stripped. No furniture, no personal items, just the infrastructure of observation. 3 monitors on a folding table against the far wall, each displaying a different camera feed. The hallway outside Marigold's apartment. The building's lobby entrance. And the street view from a camera mounted somewhere she hadn't noticed in 8 months of living here. And a laptop beside the monitors, open, running a program she didn't recognize, audio waveforms scrolling in real time. Her apartment was wired for sound. They'd been listening, not just watching. Listening to her phone calls, her conversations with Beckett, her 3 a.m. sessions on the bathroom floor when the pregnancy symptoms hit and she talked to herself because there was no one else to talk to. Marigold's jaw locked. The violation was so complete it felt architectural, but not a single intrusion, but a structure built around her daily life, absorbing every private moment and converting it into data. And sitting in a folding chair beside the monitors, not hiding, not apologizing, just present, was Benedetto Ferrara. Sit down, Marigold. I'll stand. As you wish. Benedetto looked different in this light. No overcoat, no restaurant performance. Yeah, he wore a plain sweater and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. The stripped-down version of a man who'd removed his public armor and was operating in maintenance mode. You've been watching me for 5 months, Marigold said. Protecting you for 5 months? Those are not the same thing. In this case, they are. And I invited you here to explain why. Because the alternative is that you continue operating on assumptions that will get you hurt. Or worse, like get that child hurt. The child. He knew. Of course he knew. The audio surveillance would have captured every conversation, every phone call with Beckett, every discussion about due dates and prenatal vitamins, and fake engagement logistics. How much do you know? Marigold asked. Everything. The pregnancy, Nolan's arrangement, the ring from Atlantic Avenue, the plan to relocate to Philadelphia. He paused. And the fact that the baby is Maurizio's, not Nolan's. The room's electronic hum filled the silence between them. 3 monitors, 3 camera feeds. Her entire life reduced to rectangles of light on a folding table. Does Maurizio know? No. The word landed with a weight that rearranged the room. He doesn't know about the pregnancy? He knows you're pregnant. The surveillance captured that information in September. He does not know the child is his. He believes because you've been performing brilliantly. I should add that the baby belongs to your fiance. Marigold processed this in layers. Layer 1. Maurizio knew she was pregnant, had known for weeks, and hadn't contacted her. Layer 2. He believed the baby was Beckett's. The fake engagement was working, at least on that front. Layer 3. Benedetto had just said no with the tone of a man who had chosen not to share this information with his boss, which meant the consigliere was keeping secrets from the king. Why haven't you told him? Marigold asked. Benedetto removed his glasses from his forehead, cleaned them on his sweater, the gesture of a man buying himself 3 seconds to frame a truth he'd been carrying alone. Because telling Maurizio the child is his would activate a response I cannot control. And the reason I cannot control it is the same reason you're standing in this apartment instead of sleeping safely in your own. Which is? The Orsetti family. The name hit like a frequency change. New information reshaping everything that came before it. 18 months ago, Benedetto said, Maurizio entered a territorial dispute with the Orsetti organization over shipping access through Port Newark. The dispute escalated, not publicly, not violently, through leverage. Thus, the Orsettis specialize in leverage, bimsa. They identify the people closest to their rivals and apply pressure until the rival capitulates. What kind of pressure? The kind that targets civilians, wives, children, partners. Benedetto paused. They identified you in April, 3 months into your relationship with Maurizio. A surveillance team, not ours, theirs, began documenting your movements, your schedule, your apartment, your habits. April, Marigold said. We were still together in April. You were. And Maurizio discovered the Orsetti surveillance in May, through an informant inside their operation. A man named Silvano Orsetti, Constantino Orsetti's nephew, had been assigned to build a file on you, a pressure file. The kind that gets delivered to a rival with an implied message. Cooperate or we visit the woman. The room tilted. Not physically, structurally. In every assumption Marigold had built since the terrace, every interpretation of Maurizio's behavior, every conclusion about his motives, shifting on a foundation that had just been revealed as incomplete. He didn't leave me because I was a liability, Marigold said. Slowly, testing the words. He left you because the Orsettis had already built a file on you. Your movements, your routines, your apartment. If he stayed connected to you visibly, publicly, that file would become operational. You would become a target, not a theoretical target, a scheduled one. So he cut me off. He severed every visible connection, ended the relationship, made it public, made it clean. So the Orsettis would see a woman who was no longer relevant to their leverage strategy. And the surveillance, Meridian, this apartment? His replacement. He removed the visible connection and installed an invisible one, a protection detail you were never supposed to know about. But because knowing would create communication, and communication could be intercepted by the same people he was trying to blind. Here it is. The midpoint. The door you didn't know existed. Maurizio Calabrese didn't hand Marigold $8,000 and a goodbye because he stopped loving her. He did it because a rival family had built a targeting file on the woman he loved, and the only way to remove her from their crosshairs was to remove himself from her life. The erasure wasn't cruelty, and it was camouflage. The surveillance wasn't control. It was the only form of protection he could provide without repainting the target on her back. And the $75,000 in Beckett's account? Not a bribe. Not a monitoring fee. Operational support. Residential. Maurizio saw the pregnancy, saw the engagement, believed the baby was Beckett's, and funded the man he thought was building a life with the woman Maurizio couldn't be near. Because if he couldn't protect her directly, he'd finance the man who could. He was paying for her safety from inside his own exile. Marigold sat down, the folding chair cold against her back, the metal warm in her fist. The $75,000, she said. He sent it to Beckett because he thinks Beckett is the father. He's funding the life he believes you're building with another man. Yes. And Beckett doesn't know. No one knows except me, and now you. Why are you telling me this, Benedetto? What if Maurizio wanted this invisible? If the whole point was to keep me in the dark, why blow it open? Benedetto leaned forward. The monitors glowed behind him. 3 feeds, 3 angles on a life he'd been watching for 5 months. Because you're about to relocate to Philadelphia, and the Orsetti file on you is still active. Silvano Orsetti was reassigned, not retired. He's been dormant because you appeared irrelevant after the breakup. But a pregnant woman fleeing to another city with a new fiancé raises questions. Movement draws attention. And if Silvano reopens that file and discovers the child is Maurizio's, he didn't finish. Didn't need to. A baby fathered by Maurizio Calabrese wasn't a secret. It was the most powerful piece of leverage the Orsetti family could ever hold. And Marigold was 14 weeks away from making it visible to the world. What do I do? She asked. You stop running. Running makes you visible. And you tell Maurizio the truth, that the child is his, so he can protect you both with full information instead of operating blind. Telling Maurizio means ending the engagement, ending the cover, exposing Beckett. Telling Maurizio means giving a father the chance to protect his child, which is something your father never did for you. The sentence hit the one unguarded wall Marigold had left. Her father, the man she'd never met. Just the absence she'd carried like a second skeleton, present in every room, shaping every decision and invisible to everyone except the woman it had built. She'd constructed the fake engagement to keep Maurizio away from his child, to control the narrative, to ensure that her baby would never depend on a man who made unilateral decisions about the people he claimed to love. But Maurizio's unilateral decision, the terrace, the envelope, the severance, hadn't been abandonment. Else it had been the desperate, flawed, silent act of a man trying to keep the woman he loved alive. Wrong in method, right in motive, and now, without the truth, operating blind in a situation where blindness could kill. Marigold stood, walked to the door, stopped. If I tell him, will he come for me? Benedetto looked at her with the tired certainty of a man who'd watched Maurizio Calabrese pace his apartment for 5 months, checking Meridian's reports at midnight, unfunding a rival's life because it kept the woman he loved safe. Marigold, he never left. Sunday, 9:41 a.m. Beckett's apartment. Marigold stood in Beckett's kitchen and lied about the walk. Just needed air. The baby had me up early. Beckett leaned against the counter, coffee in hand. Black, the way he drank it when he was worried. He'd found her note. He'd waited. He hadn't called. 19 years of friendship had taught him the geography of Marigold's independence, where the borders were, which ones he could cross, which ones existed specifically to keep him on the other side. You were gone an hour and 40 minutes, he said. I walked slow. Pregnant women walk slow. You don't walk slow, Mari. You've never walked slow in your life. She almost smiled. The observation was so precisely Beckett, tracking her rhythms without being asked, by cataloging her patterns the way a meteorologist catalogs weather systems, not to control, to understand. She sat at his kitchen table, the table where they'd eaten 1,000 meals, where she'd studied for the GRE while he iced his hands after sparring, where 3 weeks ago she'd told him about the pregnancy and watched his face perform 2 emotions simultaneously, concern for her future and something underneath, something that looked like a window opening. She had to close that window now. I need to tell you something, Marigold said, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond. Beckett set the coffee down, sat across from her, arms on the table, the posture of a man preparing to receive weight. The $75,000 came from Maurizio. We know that. Odessa traced it. I know why he sent it. She paused, measured the words. Each one was a brick she was placing between them. Necessary, structural, permanent. Maurizio has had a surveillance operation on my apartment for 5 months. Cameras, audio, a team operating out of the vacant unit on my floor. He knows about the pregnancy. He knows about the engagement. Beckett didn't move. The stillness of a man whose internal architecture was absorbing impact without showing the cracks. He's been watching you, Beckett said. Protecting me. From a rival family, Busty. The Orsettis. They built a targeting file on me last spring. Now, that's why Maurizio ended things, not because he wanted to, because staying visible with me made me a target. And you know this how? Benedetto Ferrara told me this morning in apartment 3C. The silence that followed wasn't Beckett's usual calibrated pause. It was different, deeper. The silence of a man recalculating not just the situation, but his position inside it. You went to the surveillance apartment, he said, alone without telling me. I received a text at 6 a.m. Benedetto invited me. The information was conditional. He'd only share it with me. And you trusted that. I trusted that Benedetto has been watching me for 5 months and hasn't harmed me. I trusted that the information he was offering would explain things I needed explained. And I trusted my own judgment. Your judgment walked you into a room full of cameras operated by the man you're hiding from, Mari. The man I thought I was hiding from. That's what's changed. Beckett stood. I walked to the window, looked out at Sackett Street, the hardware store below, the Saturday morning foot traffic, the ordinary world continuing its ordinary operations while his extraordinary situation rearranged itself inside a kitchen that smelled like coffee and cedar soap. The money, he said, without turning around. Maurizio thinks the baby is yours. He thinks the engagement is real. Yet he sent the $75,000 to support you, because he believes you're building a life with me and he can't be near me without putting me in danger. He's funding me. He's funding the man he thinks is protecting me. Beckett turned, and Marigold saw it. The thing she'd been afraid of seeing since the pawn shop on Atlantic Avenue. Since the ring. Since the moment Beckett had agreed to play a role that fit him better than any real thing he'd ever worn. Pain. Not anger. Not jealousy. Not the specific, quiet devastation of a man realizing that the performance he'd secretly hoped was becoming real had been scripted by and funded by someone else entirely. Beckett, don't. I know what you need to say. I've known since you called me from your bathroom floor. He pressed his palms against the window frame, knuckles white. You're going back to him. I'm going to tell him the truth about the baby, about the engagement, about everything. Benedetto says the Orsetti file is still active. If I relocate, I become visible again. And if they discover the baby is Maurizio's, I understand the logistics, Mari. I've understood the logistics since October 3rd. I understand threat assessment. I understand operational security. I understand that a 14-week pregnancy fathered by a man who controls half of South Brooklyn carries a different risk profile than a baby fathered by a middleweight boxer who manages a gym. His voice cracked on the last word. Not dramatically. A hairline fracture, Samal, the sound of a man who'd spent a decade holding something and was being asked to set it down. What I don't understand, he continued, is how I'm supposed to take this ring back. Stop here. Stay with this. On her because Beckett Nolan is not the villain of this story, and he's not the obstacle. He's the man who said yes when the woman he loved needed shelter, knowing the shelter was temporary, knowing the role was borrowed, knowing that every dinner and every held hand and every public performance of a life he wanted to live for real was a lease that would expire. He agreed anyway. Because that's what love looks like when it doesn't get to win. It shows up, it holds the line, and it lets go when the holding becomes more about you than about them. Some of you watching right now know exactly what this feels like. The person you do anything for, as a boss, and the moment you realize that anything included stepping aside. Beckett deserved better than a $42 ring and a role with an expiration date. And Marigold knew it, which is why telling him the truth was the hardest thing she'd done since the terrace, because the terrace hurt her. This hurt someone who'd never done anything but show up. Marigold crossed the kitchen, stood beside him at the window, close, not touching. The distance of a woman who understood that proximity right now was both necessary and cruel. I'm not going back to him, she said. I'm going to him. There's a difference. Is there? Going back means choosing the past. Going to him means choosing safety. For the baby. For me. And for you. For me? If the Orsettis are monitoring this situation, Beckett, you're in it now. The fake engagement put your name on their radar. Renzo saw us at Osteria. Benedetto cataloged your name. If they investigate the fiancé of a woman connected to Maurizio Calabrese, they find a middleweight boxer with a gym account that just received $75,000 from Calabrese Holdings. You look like an operative. You look like a target. The color left Beckett's face, not fear, recognition. But the mathematical understanding that his act of love had placed him inside a machine he hadn't known existed. I need to tell Maurizio the truth so he can protect all of us with full information, Marigold said. And I need you to let me. Let you? I'm asking, not informing. There's a difference and it matters. Beckett was quiet. 7 seconds. Long. The longest. What happens to the engagement? We end it, publicly, after Maurizio knows. A clean break. Amicable, quiet, yeah, no drama. And us? The question underneath every question he'd ever asked her. 2 words that carried 19 years and a decade of silence, and a ring that cost $42 and fit perfectly. Marigold took his hand, held it. The way you hold something precious and borrowed with gratitude, with care, with the aching awareness that returning it would leave your hands empty. You're my best friend. My family. Unlike the person who answered the phone at 3 a.m. and didn't ask for anything except for me to stay still until you got there. That's not an answer. It's the truest thing I have, and I won't lie to you, not after everything. Beckett looked at their hands. Her left hand, the ring still on it. $42 of cubic zirconia pressing against his palm. He slid the ring off her finger. Slowly. The way you remove a bandage when you know the wound underneath isn't healed, but the covering has to come off anyway. Held it in his fist. Closed his fingers around it. Go talk to him, Beckett said. Tell him the truth. And if he doesn't... He stopped. Swallowed. Restarted. If he doesn't show up the way a father should, you call me. And I'll be there the way I've always been there. Beckett, go, Mari. She went down the stairs, past the hardware store, into the October morning. At her left hand was bare. The ring was gone. The engagement, the shelter, the performance, the beautiful borrowed lie was over. Her right hand was in her pocket. Metal against her palm. Saint Christopher. The child on his shoulders. The river they were still crossing. Her phone buzzed. Block number. Another text. Maurizio knows you went to 3C. Benedetto told him. He's coming to find you. He doesn't know about the baby yet, but he knows the engagement is a cover. You have approximately 2 hours before he reaches Brooklyn. Decide what you want him to hear, because once he's in front of you, there are no more scripts. Sunday, 12:07 p.m., the boxing gym. Marigold chose the gym. Not her apartment, monitored, compromised, no longer hers in any way that mattered. Not Beckett's place. She wouldn't bring Maurizio into the space where Beckett had just let her go. Not a restaurant, not a park, not anywhere the Orsetti name could be listening. Yeah, the boxing gym on Van Brunt Street. Red door. No sign. The back office that smelled like leather polish and tiger balm. The room where she'd put the ring on. The room where the lie began. She wanted the truth to start in the same place. Beckett gave her the key without being asked. Handed it across like a man passing a baton he'd been carrying for a race he was no longer running. Didn't say where he'd go while she used his space to meet the father of the child he'd been pretending was his. Lock up when you're done, he said. That was all. Marigold sat behind the desk. The cracked vinyl chair. The same position she'd occupied 3 days ago when the ring went on and the performance began. Now the ring was gone. Her finger still carried the indent, a pale circle where the band had pressed against skin. The ghost of a commitment that was never real and cost more than any real one she'd ever made. The medal sat on the desk in front of her, not in her pocket, placed deliberately. Brass, smooth, St. Christopher facing upward. She wanted it visible, wanted Maurizio to see it, to remember the night on the Brooklyn Bridge when she'd shown it to him and he'd held it like it mattered. Because what she was about to tell him would test whether anything from those 3 months had been real. Or whether the man who'd replaced her heating system and watched container ships with her and held her grandmother's medal in his palm had been a performance too. The red door opened. Footsteps through the gym, past the heavy bags, past the ring ropes, toward the office. He appeared in the doorway at 12:11 p.m. Maurizio Calabrese looked like a man who hadn't slept in months and had gotten very good at hiding it. The suit was gone. Jeans, dark sweater, work boots, the same ones from the radiator visit, or identical. His face carried the specific exhaustion of someone who'd been holding a position too long without relief. The jawline sharper, the eyes darker. The warmth she remembered from early mornings and late walks buried under layers of operational discipline. He stood in the doorway, didn't enter. The threshold went to the same instinct Umberto had shown in another story, the posture of a man observing before committing to the room. Except this wasn't another story. This was hers. "Sit down," Marigold said. "I'll stand." "You've been standing for 5 months, watching from vacant apartments and funding other men's bank accounts. Sit down." "Maurizio, you owe me a conversation at eye level." He sat, the folding chair on the other side of the desk, 3 feet between them, close enough to read every micro-expression, far enough to maintain the boundary that 11 weeks of silence had built. His eyes moved to the metal on the desk, registered it, then to her face, then involuntarily, the one movement he couldn't control, to her belly. 14 weeks, not showing in the black dress at Osteria, showing now, as in the thin sweater and the unforgiving light of a boxing gym office, the slight curve that announced a future neither of them had planned. "Benedetto told me about the Orsettis," Marigold said. "He shouldn't have. He told me about the file, the surveillance, the reason you ended things in May. He had no authority to, He had no authority to keep it from me either, and neither did you." Maurizio's hands were on his knees, flat, pressed, the posture of a man holding himself in place. "Yeah, I did what I had to do," he said. "You did what you decided to do, alone, without asking me. Asking you would have required explaining the threat. Explaining the threat would have required ongoing communication. Ongoing communication could have been intercepted by the same people I was trying to blind, I know." Benedetto explained the logic. It's clean logic, operational, airtight. She leaned forward. And it left me pregnant and alone on a bathroom floor at 3 in the morning with no explanation, and no one to call except the man you later paid $75,000 to. The sentence landed. Maurizio's expression didn't change. Gestalt's. He was too disciplined for that. But his breathing did. One interrupted inhale, the body betraying what the face refused to show. "The pregnancy," he said. Carefully. "Benedetto told me the engagement was a cover. He didn't tell me that the baby is yours." The office went silent. The gym's ventilation system hummed. Somewhere outside, a truck reversed. Beep, 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 beep. The Sunday rhythm of a neighborhood that didn't know two people were sitting 3 feet apart while a decade of consequence settled between them. "The baby is mine," Maurizio repeated. Not a question. A recalibration. The sound of a man's entire strategic framework, every decision, every payment, and every month of silent surveillance and being rebuilt from the foundation up. 14 weeks, due in April, healthy. I've attended every appointment. Alone. I didn't know. Because you built a system designed to watch me without knowing me. Cameras, audio, monthly payments. You could see me walk to my door and hear me cry on my bathroom floor, but you didn't know the most basic fact about what was happening inside my body. Because surveillance isn't intimacy, Maurizio. Yes, and protection without communication isn't love. It's management. Hold this, because it's the center of everything. Maurizio Calabrese is not a bad man. He's a man who processes love through system, through structures he can build and control and monitor from a distance. He learned this from his father. He refined it through his work. And when the woman he loved was threatened, he defaulted to the only language he trusted, operational security. But operations don't hold you at 3 a.m. And operations don't sit beside you at an ultrasound. Operations don't answer the question a pregnant woman asks herself in every dark hour. Am I doing this alone? The answer, for 5 months, was yes. And no amount of hidden cameras or funded bank accounts could undo the damage of that silence. Protecting someone without telling them why isn't love. It's control wearing a costume. Maurizio is about to learn whether the costume can come off and what's underneath when it does. Maurizio stood, not to leave, to move. He crossed the 3 feet between them and knelt beside the desk chair. Not theatrically, heavily, the way a man kneels when his legs can no longer support the weight of what he's carrying. I made a mistake, he said. You made a decision. Decisions are worse than mistakes. Mistakes are accidental. You chose this. I chose it because the alternative was watching the Orsettis reach you. They don't negotiate, Marigold. They don't threaten. That they execute leverage operations with a precision that I believe you. I believe the threat was real. I believe you were afraid. She looked down at him. What I don't believe is that the only option was silence. You could have told me, could have explained the danger, could have let me choose how to respond to a threat against my own life. And if you'd chosen to stay, then we would have faced it together. Yeah, and I wouldn't have spent 5 months believing the man I loved threw me away like a line item he no longer needed. Maurizio's head dropped. Not a performance, and the involuntary surrender of a man hearing his own actions described from the other side of the wall he'd built. I watched you every night, he said, quietly, the voice stripped of authority. The monitors, Meridian's feeds. I told myself it was operational, told myself I was managing a security concern. But every night I sat in my apartment and watched you move through yours, making dinner, reading on the couch, talking to the baby when you thought no one could hear. You heard that? I heard everything. And every night I almost called, almost drove to Gowanus, almost walked through your door and told you everything. And every night I convinced myself that staying away was keeping you safe. Was it? From the Orsettis, yes. From everything else, oh, no. Marigold looked at him, kneeling. Sweater, work boots. The man who'd fixed her radiator and watched container ships and held her grandmother's medal and then vanished. Not into indifference, but into a surveillance room 10 feet from her bedroom door. She reached to the desk, picked up the medal, held it between them. My grandmother carried this across every hard thing in her life, Marigold said. She didn't watch from a distance. She didn't hire someone to carry it for her. She held it, daily, directly. Yeah, that's what protection looks like. Present, not proxied. She placed the medal in his hand, closed his fingers around it. I'm not asking you to be safe, Maurizio. I'm asking you to be here, in the room, in the conversation, in the doctor's office, and the 3 a.m. feedings, and the terrifying ordinary Tuesday nights where nothing is wrong, and you still show up because showing up is the whole point. And the Orsettis? We handle them together, with full information, like partners. Not like a man running an operation and a woman living inside it without her consent. Maurizio looked at the medal in his hand. Brass, warm, worn smooth by 2 generations of women who carried their fear in their pockets and their courage in their grip. Together, he said. Together. But I need you to understand about together has conditions. No more unilateral decisions about my safety. No more surveillance without my knowledge. No more systems that replace conversations. But if you can't do that, Eddie, if the only way you know how to love is from behind a monitor, then I walk out this door and I raise this child with the one man who never needed cameras to show up. The mention of Beckett landed precisely where Marigold aimed it. Not as a threat, as a fact. A reminder that the man who'd worn the $42 ring had done more with presence than Maurizio had done with $75,000. Maurizio closed his eyes, opened them. I can do that, he said. I don't know how yet, but I can learn. Learning isn't a promise, it's a practice. Then I'll practice every day, starting now. He handed the medal back. Their fingers touched during the transfer, the same way they'd touched on the Brooklyn Bridge 8 months ago. The same current, the same recognition. But different now, informed by damage, weighted by absence, shaped by the understanding that love, real love, how the kind that survives what they'd done to each other, required more than devotion. It required presence, consistent, imperfect, unmonitored. Marigold pocketed the medal. There's a doctor's appointment on Tuesday, she said. 16-week checkup. Dr. Amara Osei, Clinton Hill, 9:30 a.m. I'll be there. In the room, not in a car outside, but in the room. And Beckett, you owe him a conversation. Not money, not surveillance removal, a conversation, man to man. He protected me when you wouldn't. He deserves to hear you acknowledge that. Maurizio nodded. The nod of a man accepting terms he hadn't written, and understanding for the first time that accepting terms was the whole point. Tuesday, 9:17 a.m. Dr. Amara Ose's office, Clinton Hill. Maurizio was 13 minutes early. Marigold found him in the waiting room, but sitting in a plastic chair between a woman reading a parenting magazine and a man scrolling his phone with the glazed expression of someone who'd been waiting long enough to forget why. Maurizio looked like neither of them. He looked like a man who'd arrived early because arriving on time wasn't sufficient proof of commitment. He stood when she walked in, didn't speak, didn't reach for her, just stood, present, visible, occupying the space between promise and proof. "Oh, you're early," Marigold said. "I've been late for 5 months. I'm correcting." She almost smiled. Almost. The instinct fought with the discipline of a woman who understood that trust wasn't rebuilt by one waiting room appearance, but the instinct was there, and she let him see it. A small thing, an opening. They sat, side by side, not touching. The 12 inches between their chairs loaded with everything that had happened and everything that hadn't yet. The ultrasound was at 9:34. Doctor. Yo say, mid-40s, braids pinned up, the calm authority of a woman who'd guided hundreds of parents through this exact moment, applied the gel and placed the transducer. The screen filled. A head, a spine, hands, tiny, curled, already shaped like something human. And the heartbeat, rapid, steady, amplified through the speaker like a transmission from a world Marigold could feel but had never seen until now. Maurizio's hand found the armrest, gripped it, his jaw locked. Yet his eyes didn't move from the screen. "Strong heartbeat," Dr. Ose said. 152 BPM, right on target for 16 weeks. "Is that?" Maurizio's voice came out rough. He cleared his throat. Started again. "Is that normal?" "Perfectly normal. Your baby is exactly where they should be." "Your baby." Dr. Ose said it casually, the routine pronoun of a physician addressing two parents in a room. And she didn't know that those two words were the first time anyone had said your baby to Maurizio Calabrese while he was present for the hearing. Marigold watched him. Not the screen. Him. The man who controlled shipping routes and construction contracts and half the commercial real estate in South Brooklyn, sitting in a plastic chair, watching his child's heartbeat on a monitor, learning in real time what it felt like to be in the room instead of watching it on a surveillance feed. Yet his eyes were wet. He didn't wipe them, didn't hide it. Let the tears sit there like evidence of something he'd denied himself for 5 months. "Can you tell?" He stopped, restarted. "Can you tell if they're okay? Not just the heartbeat, everything. Everything I can measure looks excellent. Growth is on track. Anatomy is developing normally. You have a healthy baby." Maurizio exhaled. A breath he'd been holding since Marigold placed the medal in his hand on Sunday and told him the truth. I thought they walked out of the clinic at 10:15. October sun, Brooklyn in its best costume, golden light, sharp air, the kind of morning that makes concrete look intentional. Maurizio's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. Benedetto. "Take it," Marigold said. He answered, listened. His face changed, not dramatically, but the way a sky changes before weather. The warmth from the ultrasound draining into something operational. "When?" he said. Listened. "How many?" Listened. Don't move until I get there." He hung up. Looked at Marigold with the expression of a man being pulled between two identities. The father who'd just seen his child's heartbeat and the man whose world required him to respond to a phone call that meant danger. "Silvano Orsetti," he said. He reactivated the file. "Benedetto intercepted communications this morning. Says Silvano has a team in Brooklyn. They've been tracking activity around the gym, your apartment, and Beckett's building since Friday. Since the engagement went public? Since the engagement went public and then visibly collapsed. You were seen leaving Beckett's apartment Sunday morning. Alone. No ring. Silvano's people flagged the change. A woman connected to me who was engaged and suddenly isn't. That raises questions they want answered. The golden morning didn't change. The light didn't dim. The air didn't shift. Not but the space around Marigold compressed, the familiar sensation of a threat she couldn't see reorganizing itself at the edges of her life. What do they know? She asked. They know the engagement ended. They don't yet know the baby is mine, but they're looking. And if they surveil the right moment, us leaving this clinic together, for example, they'll have confirmation. So we just handed them evidence by coming here today. No, we came here today because I promised to be in the room, and I'm done making decisions based on what the Orsettis might see. He paused. But we need to move fast, before they assemble enough to build a new leverage operation. Move fast how? By doing the one thing they'll never expect. Here's what men like Silvano Orsetti don't understand about the people they target. They build leverage files because they believe that secrets are pressure points, that hidden relationships, concealed pregnancies, and undisclosed connections are vulnerabilities to be exploited. And they're right, as long as the secrets stay hidden. But a secret that's been disclosed voluntarily, publicly, on your own terms, isn't leverage, it's a fact. And facts can't be weaponized the same way secrets can. You can't threaten to reveal something everyone already knows. Maurizio spent 5 months hiding Marigold to protect her. It almost destroyed them both. Now he was about to try the opposite. Full visibility. Total disclosure. The most counterintuitive move in the playbook of a man who'd been trained to operate in shadows. 3 p.m. The social club on Columbia Street. Not the back room, not the private office, the main floor, where the old men played cards and the espresso machine hissed, and the neighborhood's architecture of power was visible to anyone who walked through the door. Maurizio called them in. All of them. Benedetto, Prospero, the captains, the attorneys, the accountants. 18 men seated around tables pushed together, coffee cups and water glasses forming a perimeter around the conversation that was about to happen. And Marigold, seated at Maurizio's right, visible, present, not behind a screen, not in a surveilled apartment, in the room. Beckett was there too, standing near the door, arms crossed. Maurizio had called him that morning Satao, not with money, not with operational instructions, but with 4 words. I need your help. Beckett had come. Not for Maurizio, for Marigold. The distinction was important to him, and he made sure it was visible. Maurizio stood. The room quieted. Marigold Vance is carrying my child, due in April. This is not a rumor. This is not speculation. This is a fact I'm stating in this room so that every person present hears it from me before they hear it from anyone else. 18 men processed this at different speeds. Prospero's eyebrows rose. Lon Benedetto, who already knew, watched the room instead of the speaker. 2 captains exchanged a glance. An attorney opened a notebook. The Orsetti family has maintained a file on Marigold since last spring. That file was based on a relationship I publicly ended in May. The ending was strategic, designed to remove Marigold from their targeting criteria. It failed. Silvano Orsetti has reactivated surveillance as of this week. He has a team in Brooklyn. How many? Prospero asked. Benedetto is confirming. Estimate is 4. A surveillance unit, not an action team. But the purpose of surveillance is to build a case for action. We're not going to wait for that case to be built. What's the play? Prospero asked. Disclosure. Full and public. I'm acknowledging Marigold as my partner and the mother of my child. To our people, to our networks, to anyone the Orsettis might approach for confirmation or leverage. That makes her visible, one of the captains said. A man named Fausto Gennari, silver-haired, cautious, the kind of voice that had survived decades by asking the questions others avoided. She's already visible. Silvano's team has been on her for 4 days. The question isn't whether she's seen, it's whether she's seen as unprotected or as mine. A woman connected to me who appears isolated is a target. A woman standing in this room, publicly acknowledged, but with the full infrastructure of this family behind her, that's a deterrent. Fausto considered this. The room considered this. 18 men calculating the risk-reward of a strategy that inverted every protocol they'd been trained on. Benedetto spoke, quietly, the way he always spoke, with the understanding that volume was irrelevant when the content was heavy enough. Constantino Orsetti operates on information asymmetry, but his leverage model depends on knowing things his rivals haven't disclosed. If Maurizio discloses everything, bossas, the relationship, the pregnancy, the protection infrastructure, there is nothing left for the Orsettis to discover. No secret to exploit, no pressure point to press. The file becomes useless. And Silvano's team? Fausto asked. Recalled. Once the leverage evaporates, the surveillance has no purpose. Constantino doesn't waste resources on operations that can't produce results. Fausto looked at Marigold. The first time any of the men in the room had looked at her directly, assessing, not with hostility, with the calculation of a man determining whether this woman was strong enough to occupy the position Maurizio was placing her in. Marigold looked back. Steady, 16 weeks pregnant, brass medal in her pocket. The woman who'd found out about hidden cameras and wire transfers and targeting files and was still sitting upright in a room full of men who measured strength in silence. She stays, Fausto said. Not a question. A verdict. Maurizio reached under the table, took Marigold's hand, not for show, not angled for visibility. Underneath, where no one could see, a private gesture in a public room, the inverse of everything he'd done for 5 months. She squeezed back. Once. Firm. The Orsettis will receive a message tonight, Maurizio continued. Through Benedetto's channels. Not a threat. An announcement. Marigold Vance is under Calabrese protection. The child she carries is mine. Any approach in surveillance, contact, indirect communication will be interpreted as an act against this family and responded to accordingly. And if Constantino doesn't stand down? Prospero asked. Then we escalate through legal channels. Odessa Price has documented every Orsetti surveillance action since April. Dates, operatives, methods. Enough for a federal complaint. Enough to invite the kind of attention Constantino has spent his career avoiding. You'd go federal? Prospero's tone carried genuine surprise. I'd go anywhere. She's carrying my child. The rules just changed. Beckett watched from the door, arms still crossed, face unreadable. At the man who'd worn the ring, listening to the man who should have given one describe the lengths he'd go to protect the woman they both loved. After the room cleared, men filing out, phone calls already being made, the machinery of disclosure grinding into motion, Beckett remained. Marigold remained. Maurizio remained. 3 people, a boxing gym's worth of history between 2 of them, a child's worth of future between the other 2. Maurizio turned to Beckett, stood, crossed the room, and stopped 2 feet away. You protected her when I couldn't. You wore a ring that wasn't yours and played a role that cost you something I can't calculate. And you let her go when she needed to come back to me, which was the hardest thing any man in this room did today, including me. Beckett said nothing, waited. I owe you a debt that money can't touch. So I'm not offering money. I'm offering respect. And my word that I will spend every day earning the position you held for free. Beckett looked at him. 5 seconds. Reading. The same way he'd read Marigold's silences for 19 years, with fluency and without illusion. Don't earn the position, Beckett said. Earn her. He turned, walked out. Red door, Van Brunt Street, October light. Marigold watched him go. The man who'd answered the phone at 3 a.m., who'd bought a ring on Atlantic Avenue, who'd slid it off her finger with hands that were steady because steadiness was the only thing he had left to offer. She pressed the medal in her pocket. Saint Christopher, the child on his shoulders, the river still flowing. But the current had changed direction. And for the first time since the terrace, since the envelope, since the bathroom floor, since the vacant apartment and the monitors and the $75,000 and the lie that was always too small to hold the truth, Marigold Vance was facing forward, not hiding, not performing, not running, standing. In the room, beside the man who'd finally learned that being present was worth more than being in control. 6 months later. April. The baby came on a Wednesday, April 16th. 6:03 a.m., 7 pounds, 1 ounce, a girl, dark hairs, her father's. Now wide eyes, her mother's. Hands that opened and closed in the delivery room light like someone testing the dimensions of a world she'd just arrived in. They named her Giovina. Marigold found it in a book of Italian names during her 32nd week. Lying on the couch in the brownstone Maurizio had rented in Carroll Gardens, the one with no surveillance cameras and no security infrastructure, and windows that opened from the inside because Marigold had made that a non-negotiable condition. Giovina, meaning life, meaning vitality, meaning the specific force that pushes through concrete and blooms anyway. Maurizio said the name once, twice, held the syllables in his mouth the way he'd held the brass medal on the Brooklyn Bridge, carefully, reverently, aware that he was touching something that belonged to a lineage he'd been invited into, not born with. Giovina Calabrese, he said. Giovina Vance Calabrese, Marigold corrected. Both names, both histories. Oh, she carries the whole thing. He didn't argue, didn't negotiate, nodded once with the expression of a man who was learning, daily, imperfectly, with the specific clumsiness of someone dismantling a lifetime of control. That partnership meant accepting terms he hadn't written. He'd been learning for 6 months, not in grand gestures, in small ones. The kind that don't make stories but make marriages. He was at the 16-week appointment, the 20-week anatomy scan. On the 24-week glucose test, where Marigold drank the orange liquid and called it punishment disguised as medicine, and Maurizio sat in the plastic chair beside her and didn't check his phone once in 90 minutes. He was at the birthing class in Park Slope where a woman named Clover taught breathing techniques to 8 couples, and Maurizio, a man who'd negotiated shipping contracts and territorial disputes, and the silent hierarchies of a world built on power, practiced counting to 4 on the inhale and 8 on the exhale, with the earnest concentration of a first grader learning cursive. You're overcomplicating the breathing, Marigold whispered. I'm a man who builds systems. Yeah, you're asking me to just breathe. That's exactly what I'm asking. He practiced. Got better. Didn't complain. The discipline he'd spent decades applying to operations, redirected toward the infinitely harder project of being present. The Orsetti file closed in November. Not with a confrontation. Not with violence. With the specific, anticlimactic deflation of a strategy that had lost its oxygen. Benedetto's message, delivered through the intermediary channels the night of the social club meeting, was received by Constantino Orsetti within hours. The announcement: Marigold Vance, Calabrese protection. The child acknowledged. The relationship public. Silvano Orsetti's surveillance team was recalled within 72 hours. 4 operatives. Pulled from Brooklyn. Reassigned. The file, Huts, Marigold's movements, her schedule, her habits, her apartment, archived. Not because the Orsettis had developed a conscience, because the file was worthless. You can't leverage a secret everyone already knows. Odessa Price's documentation, every Orsetti surveillance action cataloged, dated, and filed, remained in Thessaly Oren's office, safe. Not submitted, not needed, but present. A loaded weapon pointed at Constantino's operations, that held in reserve by a forensic auditor and a family law attorney who understood that the best deterrent is a consequence that never has to be deployed. Constantino Orsetti sent a bottle of wine to the social club on Columbia Street in December. No note, no message. The specific gesture of a man acknowledging a boundary he had no intention of testing again. Benedetto drank it, said it was mediocre. Here's what the Orsetti file teaches you if you're paying attention. And secrets are only leverage when they're hidden. The moment you own them, publicly, fully, without apology, they lose their power over you. Not because the information changes, because the relationship to the information changes. A secret you're hiding controls you. A truth you've disclosed belongs to you. Marigold spent 5 months hiding a pregnancy. Maurizio spent 5 months hiding a protection detail. The Orsettis spent 5 months building a file designed to exploit both. And all 3 strategies collapsed the moment someone stood in a room and said the truth out loud. If you're carrying something right now, a secret, a fear, a truth you've been managing instead of speaking, consider the possibility that the weight isn't protecting you. It's the mechanism someone else is using to keep you controllable. Put it down, say it out loud, own it, and watch the file close. Beckett, the hardest chapter. Yet the one Marigold carried in her chest like a second heartbeat through every month of the pregnancy, every doctor's appointment, every moment of building something with Maurizio that required dismantling something with Beckett. He didn't disappear. That wasn't Beckett. Disappearing would have required him to be someone other than the man who'd answered every call for 19 years. But he recalibrated. The distance wasn't dramatic, it was architectural. He stopped coming to Sunday dinners, now stopped texting daily, stopped being the first person Marigold called when something happened, not because she didn't want to, because she understood that calling Beckett first while building a life with Maurizio was a cruelty disguised as habit. She called Maurizio first now, for the mundane things, the scary things, the 3 a.m. things, training herself and him to occupy the roles they'd chosen. Beckett trained for a fight. December card, middleweight, and a bout at a venue in Sunset Park against a southpaw from Philadelphia with fast hands and bad intentions. He threw himself into preparation the way men throw themselves into physical pain when emotional pain needs somewhere to go. Heavy bag at 6 a.m., road work at dawn, sparring sessions that left his hands swollen and his mind temporarily quiet. He won. Split decision. Close enough that the crowd argued for 20 minutes afterward. Marigold wasn't there, 7 months pregnant. Carol Garden's couch, watching a grainy live stream on her phone. She texted him afterward. One word. Proud. He responded 40 minutes later. 2 words. Thank you. The space between those messages, 40 minutes of a man sitting in a locker room with wrapped hands and a bruised rib, deciding how many words to give the woman he loved, was the most honest conversation they'd had in months. In February, Beckett met someone. Her name was Darcy Corey, 31, physical therapist. She worked with fighters at a clinic in Dumbo, sports rehabilitation, joint recovery, the careful art of putting bodies back together after they'd been taken apart. She was direct. Unimpressed by machismo, laughed at Beckett's jokes with the specific delight of a woman who found him genuinely funny rather than performatively charming. Marigold met her in March. Coffee at Clementine's, the bakery in Fort Lee with the floral wallpaper and the 1997 decor. Darcy arrived with no agenda and no awareness that she was being evaluated by the most important person in her boyfriend's history. She's good, Marigold told Beckett afterward. On the phone, the first long conversation they'd had in weeks. Yeah? She looks at you the way you deserve to be looked at. How's that? Like you're not a backup plan. Silence on the line. 4 seconds. Medium. Processing. That's a good way to be looked at, he said. It's the only way. Beckett was at the hospital when Giovina was born. Not in the delivery room. In the waiting area. 4th floor. Sitting in a plastic chair with coffee he wasn't drinking, beside Darcy, who held his hand without asking why he needed it held. Maurizio came out at 6:47 a.m. scrubs. The face of a man who'd just watched a miracle and hadn't assembled the language to describe it yet. He walked to Beckett, stood in front of him. She's here, Maurizio said. 7 pounds 1 ounce. She's perfect. And Marigold? Incredible. Stronger than anyone I've ever seen. Beckett nodded, stood, extended his hand. Maurizio took it. Not the handshake of allies or business partners. The handshake of 2 men who loved the same woman at different times and in different ways and had found, through pain and pride and 6 months of learning, a way to exist in the same story without one of them being the villain. Congratulations, Beckett said. Thank you. For everything. Don't thank me, just keep showing up. Every day. Every day. Marigold held Giovina for the first time at 6:14 a.m. Before the nurses finished their notes, before Maurizio came back from the hallway, before anyone else in the world knew this child's name. Just the 2 of them, a mother and a daughter. The weight of 7 pounds settled against her chest like an answer to a question she'd been carrying since a bathroom floor in Gowanus. Am I doing this alone? No, not anymore, not ever again. The medal sat on the bedside table, brass, smooth, St. Christopher carrying the child across the river. Marigold had carried this child across every river, lies and surveillance and empty apartments and $42 rings and $75,000 deposits, and the terrible geography of loving a man who showed devotion through systems instead of words. She'd crossed it, all of it, and the baby in her arms was proof. Not that the crossing was easy, but that it was worth it. One last thing, the last lesson. The one this whole story has been walking towards since the pawn shop on Atlantic Avenue. Real love doesn't demand proof, it offers presence. And presence, consistent, honest, imperfect, is the only thing a child will remember. Not the surveillance, not the wire transfers, not the security teams, or the legal deterrence or the operational strategies designed to keep danger at bay. Presence. As a father in a plastic chair at a 16-week ultrasound, a best friend in a waiting room at 6 a.m., a mother holding a brass medal in her pocket while she carries a life she didn't plan into a world she's choosing to trust. If you're watching this and you're trying to protect someone you love, through distance, through control, through systems that replace the terrifying vulnerability of simply being there, hear me. Stop building walls, start showing up. The room is where it happens. Out the room is where it counts. Be in the room. June evening, the brownstone and Carroll Gardens. Marigold sat on the front stoop, Giovina in her arms, 2 months old, sleeping the absolute sleep of an infant who had not yet learned to be afraid of the world. Maurizio came through the front door, 2 mugs of tea, sat beside her, close, their shoulders touching, the specific proximity of two people who'd earned the right to occupy the same space. The street was quiet. Summer evening. Brooklyn doing what Brooklyn does, humming beneath the surface, alive with stories happening behind every door, every window, every fire escape. She has your mouth, Maurizio said, looking at Giovina. She has your stubbornness. How can you tell? She's 2 months old. She refused the bottle 3 times today and screamed until I adjusted the angle. That's your stubbornness. He laughed. Low, real. Just the laugh she'd first heard in her apartment when her cat knocked a wrench off the radiator. Pow, and before the Orsettis, before the terrace, before the silence that nearly cost them everything. Marigold leaned against him, felt the warmth, felt the solidity of a man who was learning but on a daily, imperfectly percent. To be present instead of protected, to be a partner instead of an operator, to hold things directly instead of through proxies and wire transfers and cameras mounted in hallways. Yahan, the medal was in her pocket, warm from her body heat. Saint Christopher, the child on his shoulders, the river behind them now, every river behind them. Thank you, Marigold said. For what? For being in the room. He kissed the top of her head, set his tea on the stoop, placed his hand over Giovina's back, gently, the way you touch something you've only recently been given permission to hold. There's nowhere else, he said. The evening settled. Not the streetlights came on, one by one, orange, the color of the Brooklyn night that had witnessed every chapter of this story. The baby slept. The metal rested. The man stayed, not behind a monitor, not across a distance, not through a system. Here, present, imperfect, chosen. The way it was always supposed to be. Thank you for being here, every single one of you. 9 parts. Every twist. Every city dropped. Every go that pushed this story forward. This one was about secrets. About the damage we do when we protect people from the truth instead of trusting them with it. About surveillance disguised as devotion. About a $42 ring that held more love than a $75,000 wire transfer. About a woman who crossed every river Brooklyn could throw at her and came out the other side holding a baby and a brass medal and the hard-won certainty that she was not alone. If something in Marigold's journey reached you, Bub, about motherhood, about friendship, about the difference between presence and control, tell me. Drop it below. One word, one sentence, a whole story. This comment section belongs to you. And if you're still not subscribed, come on now, you laughed with Beckett, you yelled at Maurizio, you held your breath in apartment 3C. You're not a visitor anymore. You're family. Make it official. Hit that button. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of your hearts. Own your truths. Be in the room. See you soon.